If the Iron Sultanate is humanity's fortress in the Middle East, then the Northern Faithful are humanity's frozen wall against something older, stranger, and in many ways, more personal. While the Great War rages in the Levant, the kingdoms of the frozen North are fighting an entirely different kind of war, one with fewer certainties, less divine infrastructure, and an enemy that doesn't announce itself with 8 centuries of siege, but instead tears open the sky without warning in the middle of a blizzard. This is the world of the Northern Faithful, and it covers Finland, Prussia, the Kalmar Union, the Tsardom of Novgorod, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Secret Order watching all of them from a hidden valley. So let's break them all down. So how did it all begin? When the Knights Templar committed the act of ultimate heresy in 1099 and tore open the gates of hell in Jerusalem, the devastation was immediate and total in the south. The Levant fell, Constantinople eventually fell, and the entire main theater of war locked into 800 years of grinding trench conflict in what was once the Holy Land. But the North didn't receive the same kind of sustained siege. What the North received was something arguably worse. In the vast coldness of the far north, the borders of creation sometimes give way, allowing a gaping hellmouth to manifest itself in the physical world. Some say this northern gate stands at a cross-section of ley lines where men fell prostrate before craven images in the dark days, while others say this was the place where the angel Azazel fell in the most desolate of all regions of the world. Whatever the theological truth, the result's the same. Hidden in the Kola Peninsula, a wound in reality opens without warning, in a location and at a time that shifts with the internal politics of hell itself, and the North has to be ready for it every single time. When such a time comes, the skies turn red and a hail of brimstone burns everything it touches for miles around. As the gate yawns open, the unbearable heat of hell reduces forests to cinders, and the unearthly fumes turn animals into twisted monstrosities that rend each other and themselves in anguish. Then the Hellmouth disgorges the hosts of the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, coming to challenge the rule of God. Now here's the thing. This isn't a sustained push like the one the Iron Sultanate has been holding for 800 years. This is an ambush, a catastrophe with no fixed schedule. The North doesn't get to build an iron wall and station artillery on it because they don't always know where the gate will appear next. And unlike the South, where the enemy is clearly demonic and universally understood to be evil, not all who fight for the Lords of Inferno in the North see themselves as servants of evil. The devils know how to appear beautiful and noble in the eyes of their followers, to deceive the humans. So some of the North's own people fight against the faithful, convinced they're serving something righteous because the light of the Redeemer never shone as consistently here, and many still cling to the old ways and the old gods. This is the world the Northern faithful operate in. Unpredictable, underfunded compared to New Antioch, dealing with an enemy that corrupts from the inside as much as it charges from the outside, and doing it mostly on their own. So who coordinates the response? That'd be the Synod of Strategic Prophecy. The Synod strives to predict the timing and the ever-shifting location of the Hellmouth's next appearance, so that the Church of the North and the forces of the Kalmar Union, the Knightly Orders of the North, and the Tsardom of Novgorod can muster to meet them in battle. Without the Synod, the northern nations would constantly be reacting after the gate had already opened and Hell's forces were already pouring through. So the Synod exists specifically to buy them the time to actually prepare. And the way they do it is extraordinary. The Valley of the Word serves as both the headquarters and spiritual home of the Synod. Its location remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in all of Christendom, a hidden temple nestled deep within a remote European gorge where the very stones help to amplify the echo of God's words. Within its bounds, one feels the weight of an intense gaze that pierces all shadows and falsehoods, a pressure that reveals your innermost thoughts and exposes the deepest recesses of the soul. Inside this valley, the Synod has built something that would look absurd if it weren't so effective. The floor of the valley itself forms the cloister of the temple, a vast expanse covered with arrays of dishes, antennae, radio telescopes, and listening posts, all straining towards the heavens to communicate with God. The cryptic messages they receive are processed through great difference engines designed by the Synod's ordained engineers, then translated, analyzed, and studied by scholar monks from many monasteries. Basically, the Synod has turned divine prophecy into an intelligence operation. They're not waiting for miracles. They're engineering conditions in which miracles can be systematically received, decoded, and converted into military strategy. The Synod's agents also tirelessly scour sanitariums and asylums, searching for those who claim to hear the words of the Almighty. It's a thankless task, as fewer than 1 in 10,000 that undergo the test have the true gift. The rest are prisoners of their own delusions, mere charlatans, or those whose minds have been broken by the horrors of the Great War. But when they find someone genuine, they act immediately. Rarer still are the children who hear the word with clarity, and the Synod seeks them out at the earliest age possible so they can become tacticians. Younger children with the gift hear the divine counsel far more clearly than even the most well-trained adult observers, which makes them the Synod's most valued assets. But valued is a complicated word here, because what happens to those children isn't education, it's transformation. The children are surgically, genetically, and chemically altered to make them perfectly suited to their role. They must use special machines to communicate with God. Their seclusion is even more extreme than that of the observers, and the strain on their bodies and minds is far more severe. The Synod doesn't recruit these children. It remakes them completely into something that can no longer exist outside the valley of the Word. That's the price of hearing God clearly in a world this broken. The warriors of the Synod who go out into the field are the observers. They don't deploy constantly or casually, as this order of warrior monks lives a life of absolute solitude, sharpening their minds and bodies to make themselves living weapons in the hand of God. Once a soldier joins the order, they very rarely leave the temple of the Word, and the only exception is when they're summoned to the battlefield, a situation where their unique abilities can decisively shift the balance in favor of the faithful. Their weapon of choice reflects exactly what they are. Though they master many weapons, the trench polearm stands as the preferred choice for observers, as this tool allows them to skillfully vault over barbed wire and drop into enemy trenches with devastating force. Guided by the omniscient words of the Almighty, they possess the ability to evade nearly any strike. With proper focus, they foresee impending attacks within the crystal of the eye of God that's incorporated into their helmet, and enemies' efforts to take them down are often frustrated, since the observer simply moves the minimum required to avoid any harm, knowing precisely where the blow of the heretic was going to land. However, even the slightest slip in their concentration means that they might lose the voice of God that guides them, rendering them just as vulnerable to death as any other mortal soldier. That last detail matters enormously. The observers aren't invincible. They're people who have achieved an extraordinary state of divine connection that can be broken by a single moment of distraction, in the middle of a trench, in the middle of a war. They're the most spiritually elevated soldiers on the faithful side, and simultaneously the most fragile in the one way that matters most. There's one important thing to understand about the Synod, though. They're not answerable to anyone in the way the other northern factions are. In recent years, the War Cardinal has voiced criticism of the Synod, likening their tower to the hubristic Act of Babel, and some claim his objections are less theological than political, since the Synod is becoming an independent army outside the control of the princes of the Church. The Synod is the North's intelligence organization, its prophecy engine, its early warning system, and increasingly its own armed force operating across the entire war, not just the Northern Front. Whether that's reassuring or alarming depends entirely on how much you trust an organization whose most valuable assets are surgically altered children who can't leave the building they were remade inside. Now let's talk about the soldiers, because the Northern Faithful don't all fight the same way, and each nation's approach to this war reflects exactly where they are, what resources they have, and what kind of enemy they've been fighting the longest. Finland's the first line. The Hakkapelitas are light cavalry troops of Finland, which act as the first line of defense against the heretic menace of the Northern Hellgate. Their name is derived from their war cry, Hakkapale, roughly translated as "strike at them," and it's echoed across many battlefields since the formation of the units in the 1600s to counter the opening of the Northern Hellgate. Finland doesn't have the industrial base of Prussia or the institutional weight of the Tsardom of Novgorod, so instead, the protectors of the North rely on their trusty, cold-blooded Finn horses, smaller in size than many of their counterparts, but strong, hardy, and well-suited to the freezing temperatures of the harsh Finnish winter. And this isn't a failure of imagination, it's an adaptation. The Finn horse survives in conditions that would kill imported war horses, and in Finland's terrain, a horse that can navigate a frozen bog in the dark is worth more than any vehicle that'd get stuck in the same bog and freeze solid by morning. Few roads cross the trackless forest of Finland, which stretches for hundreds of miles. The roads themselves act as ideal places to ambush the heretics, and the terrain outside the roads is even more dangerous, as within the impenetrable woodlands, deadly swamps and bogs await the unwary during the summer, while during the dark of winter, a deathly pall of snow descends upon the land. In other words, Finland turns its geography into a weapon. The land itself is on the side of the defenders, and any invading force that doesn't know these forests intimately is already dying before the first shot is fired. The Hakkapelitas fight accordingly. They don't hold lines, and they don't build fortifications. During major invasions, the Hakkapelitas act as recon and skirmish forces, delaying the enemy as the faithful muster their armies to counter them. They're the tripwire, the warning system that actually walks up to the hellmouth and stares into it so that everyone else gets to prepare. And they adapt constantly. In recent years, the death factories of hell have begun to produce more and more tanks and other armored vehicles, so the Hakkapelitas have adapted their tactics in response, carrying anti-vehicle mines, Molotov cocktails, and other weapons capable of dealing with enemy armor alongside their traditional weapons, which lack the power to pierce the metals crafted in the Iron City of Dis. This also matters as a piece of character detail. Most faithful armies won't touch weapons taken from hell because of the fear of corruption, but Finnish soldiers are experts at using the weapons, munitions, and equipment taken from their fallen enemies. They can be seen handling rifles and blades taken as war prizes from fallen heretics, and that's because the warriors of the North can't afford squeamishness as a luxury. The Hakkapelitas are pragmatists, and not because they lack faith. It's because their faith has been tested against something immediate and lethal every single day, and they've learned that God helps those who use every available resource. Their most famous warrior, Johannes Falk Koskela, served for 7 years in New Antioch before returning to his northern homeland hardened by war. Haunted by his experiences, he enlisted with the border forces and is known for his near-suicidal bravery in long-distance patrols that have taken him ever nearer to the hellmouth itself. His faithful steed, Hela, shows the terrible signs of corruption that plague all animals that stray too close to the infernal gate, and he keeps her festooned with holy symbols, hoping to keep evil at bay. That detail tells you everything you need to know about the Hakkapelitas. The horse is already showing demonic corruption, and he keeps riding anyway, spending his meager pay on protective icons, putting holy symbols on an animal that might already be lost, because that's what you do when there's no one else to do it. Now move south and the war changes character entirely. The Free State of Prussia is the North's industrial hammer. Where Finland has horses and forest knowledge, Prussia has engineering, elite doctrine, and soldiers selected specifically for the ability to look a demon in the eye and feel nothing except the desire to hit it with a trench club. The weapon of choice against the formidable obstacles of heretic fortifications in Duke Constantine XI's arsenal are the Stoßtruppen, the elite shock troops of the Free State of Prussia. And even in this nation known for their militaristic ways, the Stoßtruppen are the elite, chosen from mountaineers and veterans of the fierce battles against the northern heretics, with the cream of the combat engineers and marksmen mixed in. The Stoßtruppen aren't normal soldiers who've been given a dangerous assignment. They're people who were already operating at the extreme edge of human capability in the northern campaigns, and were then selected from that group for an even more extreme role. The most important selection criteria is to have iron in your soul, because to engage with the armies of the damned in close quarters combat requires a certain kind of soldier, one who's willing to detonate their last grenade when their own innards have been ripped open by the claws of a werewolf, or wrestle a heretic anointed and look into their eyes, see the hellfires raging there and not flinch, but bring their trench club down. Prussia's selecting for people who've passed a psychological threshold that most human beings simply can't reach. Their tactics reflect their nature. As the Stoßtruppen gather for an attack, no sound is heard, since each assault's been carefully practiced and any signs needed are given with hand signals. Heavy weapons of the unit open the assault, scattering the enemy and forcing them to take cover. Then it's a mad dash across no man's land, where violence commences as the flamethrowers sweep the exposed enemy, followed by a flurry of grenades into trenches and dugouts, and then the assault groups spread out like the wings of an eagle, clearing the trenches and sweeping behind the enemy lines. Compared to many other faithful soldiers, the Stoßtruppen are also allowed a great deal of freedom of decision-making on the battlefield. Many warbands are given high-level objectives and encouraged to find their own way to achieve them over days, weeks, and months, which is a significant departure from how most faithful armies operate. The Stoßtruppen are trusted to act independently at the squad level because their selection and training have made them capable of exactly that kind of judgment under exactly that kind of pressure. Amongst the numerous legendary Stoßtruppen warbands, there's one formation that rose to such renown it became the first example of Prussia's forces to arise in conversation: the 6th Gardekorps of Königsberg. During the infamous Battle of the Princes, the 6th, surrounded by a seemingly endless web of enemy trench networks, performed an oblique order maneuver that saw the western flank of the heretic front lines collapse under a focused assault. They then repeated this maneuver relentlessly over the course of 2 long days, with just enough variation to make it unpredictable, and over a dozen heretic trenches were overpowered and cleared as a result. Prussia in this world is also notably one of the few democratic republics in the setting, which creates a fascinating contrast. In a world dominated by monarchies and church hierarchies, Prussia has developed something approaching modern political organization, while simultaneously producing some of the most elite and brutal soldiers on the faithful side of the front. Democracy and the Stoßtruppen aren't contradictions in this world. They're products of the same culture, a society that's decided its fate depends on excellence and has built institutions accordingly. Now let's look at who holds the larger strategic picture together when the Hellmouth actually opens. The Hellmouth of the North never remains open for long, and when it does open, the Church of the North and the forces of the Kalmar Union, the Knightly Orders of the North and the Tsardom of Novgorod, must muster to meet them in battle. It's a war often fought in the middle of winter, and the servants of the court have proven to be just as adept at using intense cold and ice, as well as hellfire, in their war against the faithful of the North. The Kalmar Union unites the Scandinavian kingdoms, giving them the combined military and naval reach needed to respond rapidly to a hellmouth that could open anywhere along a vast northern coastline. The Tsardom of Novgorod covers the eastern approaches. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth contributes its legendary hussars, who can be observed in New Antioch brushing shoulders with the last remnants of the Varangian Guard, suggesting a military culture that commits forces to both the southern and northern theaters simultaneously. The full coalition of the Northern Faithful was tested to its absolute limit in the most recent major invasion. A full-scale invasion by the followers of Ziminiar struck deep into the south in 1908, and the invaders were only stopped in the cataclysmic Battle of Vilnius, where the combined forces of the Kalmar Union, Free State of Prussia, Tsardom of Novgorod, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Principality of Kiev stopped them at the very gates of the ancient city. Think about what that actually means. Vilnius, 1908, 6 years before the current year in the setting. That invasion reached Vilnius, which is far south of Finland, far south of the Kola Peninsula where the Hellmouth opens, which means the heretic forces had already driven through hundreds of miles of faithful territory before the coalition stopped them at a city's gates. The Northern Front isn't a line that holds comfortably. It's a line that catastrophically fails on a generational basis and only gets restored through the combined sacrifice of every northern nation simultaneously. And that coalition nearly wasn't enough. This is what makes the Northern Faithful so compelling as a group. The Iron Sultanate has an iron wall that's never been breached in 800 years. Divine architecture so robust that when it cracks, it seals itself with molten metal, and an organized military doctrine built over centuries of continuous defensive warfare. The Northern Faithful, on the other hand, have forests, a cavalry unit that spends its pay on horse crucifixes, shock troopers selected for the psychological ability to keep fighting after being disemboweled, a secret organization that surgically remakes children into living receivers for the voice of God, and a gate that opened 6 years ago and very nearly ended everything. They're winning, but they're winning the way Finland wins things. Barely, expensively, with every possible resource on the table, including the equipment of their dead enemies. And then there's the shadow over all of it. There's a deeper concern that the War Cardinal holds about the Northern Gate. Ziminiar, one of the royalty of fallen angels, is also the devil of the North, and the Council of Saints has issued a dire warning to the princes of the Church. If this scion of hell ever becomes the serpent head of pride, he'll come to claim the North as his own, and mountains will tremble at his passing. Ziminiar isn't just a commander who sends armies through the Hellmouth. He's a fallen angel with a personal claim on the North, and he considers it his territory. The 1908 invasion was carried out by his followers, which means the near disaster at Vilnius was him testing his strength, measuring what it'd take to break through, before he's even achieved his full potential within the infernal hierarchy. If he rises to become the serpent head of pride, the next invasion won't be stopped at Vilnius. It won't be stopped anywhere the Northern Faithful have currently managed to hold. This is the war the Northern Faithful are actually fighting. Not just the one happening right now with guns and explosive lances and difference engines processing divine prophecy. They're racing against the moment when Ziminiar becomes something larger, something that turns the occasional catastrophic breach into a permanent occupation. So what holds all of this together? What's the thread running through Finland, Prussia, the Kalmar Union, Novgorod, the Commonwealth, and the Synod? It's the understanding that they're the forgotten front. New Antioch gets the tithes. New Antioch gets the volunteers from across Christendom. And New Antioch is where the Duke commands the nominal supreme allied force of the faithful. These incursions in the north tie up the greater part of the strength of the people here, which otherwise could be used to bolster the main theater of war in the Levant. Every soldier the north sends to Finland, every Stostruppen squad clearing a heretic trench in the snow, every Hakapolita rider spending their wages on a crucifix for a horse that's already beginning to show the signs of corruption, every child the Synod surgically remakes into something that can hear God and will never leave the valley again, is a resource that doesn't go south to reinforce New Antioch. The Northern Faithful are giving everything they have to a front that the rest of the faithful world is only dimly aware of. They're doing it because if they stop, Ziminiar wins the North, and a fallen angel with a continent is a very different strategic problem than one without. They're underfunded, understaffed, fighting on terrain that's lethal to everyone, including themselves, against an enemy that opens without announcement, in service of a war that gets less attention than the main front. And they've been doing it for centuries. That's the Northern Faithful. That's what it looks like to hold the line when no one's watching. Which Northern faction or unit interests you the most? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe for more Trench Crusade lore deep dives.